And we are live here in the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner, and today, super excited to have Lou Diamond Phillips on the show with us. You know Lou Diamond Phillips. You may not realize that you do, but I promise, look back over your life. You know Lou Diamond Phillips. We chatted a couple years ago, Lou, and I think I told you that my favorite thing that you've ever done is Henry Standing Bear. And I've gotten to be friends with Craig Johnson, the author of the Longmire mystery series, over the years. And when those books got turned into the TV show that then wound up at Netflix, your portrayal of Henry Standing Bear is one of my all-time favorites. So that to Young Guns, back to La Bamba. Yes, I'm old enough to remember La Bamba when it was out in the theaters. Um, anyway, you've done so much over your career, and now writing fiction and science fiction specifically. What a joy to have you on the show with us. Welcome, Lou Diamond Phillip.
It is my pleasure. And while we're on the subject, man, I have to give a massive shout out to Craig Johnson, because the Tinderbox Soldier of Indira started as a graphic novel. My wife was going to do a graphic novel. She's an amazing illustrator, as anybody who's read the first book knows. Uh,
Yes.
and I saw it and I went, oh my gosh, this is a movie, because it reminded me immediately of like Star Wars, because she did it in the manga style, so that
Mm,
Asian influence was there. And she said, well, go ahead and write it. And I wrote the screenplay, quite honestly, and then realized, after I finished writing it, that nobody was going to give me enough money to direct it. So both Yvonne and my manager said, well, write the book, you know. And the funny thing, so we said, it's a science fiction, not that I'm a science fiction writer, or
yeah.
I science fiction movies, but it's like, well, if I'm going to make a movie of this, the commercial way to go would be science fiction. And so, but it retained its sort of fairy tale quality that Hans
Right.
Christian had. So we like to call it sci fantasy. But the funny thing is that when it came time to draw it, Yvonne was like, "I don't draw science fiction. I don't draw robots. I don't draw spaceships. So just draw what you want to draw." But we would have never gotten to the book portion of things had I not shown Craig Johnson a couple of chapters. The first book, because of my day job, acting and directing, it took me 10 years off and on. And I showed Craig a couple of chapters and I said, am I wasting my time? And it was Craig who literally said, bro, you got to finish this. You really need to see this through. So I've thanked him in both the acknowledgments of both books, and also Chris Bojalian, who kind of came in at the tail end of the first book and read it and loved it, and gave it to his agent, who had actually represented something of mine years before. So, full circle, ended up getting the first book published, and it did so well that, we went ahead and did the sequel.
Amazing, amazing. When this let me back up the two books now, because now and let me pop this up on screen so people can see. This is the new book that comes out
Yes.
in 2 weeks from tomorrow. It's called the Tinderbox Underground Movement. The Tinderbox is the series title now, because the first book was Tinderbox Soldier of Indira. Um,
Yes.
when did you first start thinking like in series potential? Was it after the success of the first book? Did you have this idea in mind to begin with? Like, how did going from that original idea that's going to be a graphic novel, this is going to be a screenplay, it's going to be a novel, then when did that start growing in your mind?
Literally when the book came out, this
Okay.
was planned two-book series, or even trilogy for that matter. And
Okay.
you know, that's a possibility at this point. But it was when the book came out, and having never published a book before, just not certain how I'd be received, in that world. And I gotta tell people, it's like, oh, hey, Lou Diamond Phillips, he's well known from movies and TV and whatnot. It was easy to get a book published. It was not. I got my fair share of rejection letters, and you know, it took a couple of revisions. It took a couple of passes at it to get it to a place where it got picked up. So it was not an easy thing, and so I didn't automatically assume I'm just going to boom, publish a book series. It was when a number of the reviews loved the world that I'd created. They loved the characters. They said, oh, we were kind of sorry that this is over. And we started thinking about, well, what could we possibly do with this? And the initial impulse was to once again raid the fairy tale world, because Hans Christian Andersen's Tinderbox is about kings and queens and princesses and
Right.
soldiers, witches, and sort of metaphysical things. And so we thought we'll stay in that world, and we thought about it for a long time. Not to give away the ending of the first one, we thought we had a jumping off place, and thought about it for about a year, 2 years, and suddenly out of the blue, it was Yvonne once again, who said, "What about this?" And she gave me a storyline that was like, wow. She had, and I say it in the acknowledgments, it's as if she had literally pulled it from between the lines of the first book.
Mm.
Made so much sense. A lot of times in the movie world, sometimes a sequel will feel like it's added on or it's tacked on and isn't as organic. This one really feels like a natural extension of the story of the first one. And I will say that while the first book is most certainly a fairy tale, the second book is a little bit more of a mystery thriller. It actually, and with some political overtones. It just it's its own creature. And people say, well, can I read the second one without reading the first? Yes, you can. It is a standalone. It's its own story. But since
But the,
there,
the world is connected, though. That like
yeah,
there are
yeah,
connections, but it's not a direct
yeah.
sequel.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't pick up right after the events of the first book. As a matter of fact, there's a little bit of a time jump, but most of the characters from the first book return with the addition of some great new ones. And I think to sort of understand the full character, so to speak, of some of the characters, to
Right.
know the journey that they've been on, it helps to have read the first one.
Yeah. I've been I read the second one, and here Steve at Athon was good enough to send me an arc of that.
Those
Uh,
fantastic. I love working with them, and they've been incredibly supportive.
yeah, they're a fantastic group of guys. Steve and Rhett have been friends of mine even before they founded Athon, and it's so fun to watch their trajectory in
Yeah.
publishing. But the it- we're in the beginning phase of NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. We're in the first week. Today's day 4, and then we're also running a 60-day writing challenge where we took the month of October to plan out a book, and then using the month of November to draft that book. And one of the big questions that we had in the beginning in our planning phase was deciding what genre we were going to write in, and then all of the things that when you decide that, all of the window dressing of story, so to speak, comes into play. Because if you're writing a science fiction story, there are certain elements that are going to come into that story. If you're writing a fantasy inspired retelling of Hans Christian Andersen, there are going to be certain elements that come into that. You took these two disparate seeming things and merged them together into something that's exciting and new. And this is not completely uncharted territory. We could argue that Star Wars is space wizards and fairy
Mhm.
tales mixed with science fiction. How did you first start thinking about the ideas of genre and how you wanted to bring your own, Lou Diamond Phillips alchemy to these ideas that seem to be so far apart but meld together so well?
So it's interesting. I mean, I think a lot of people, whether they're pantsers or whether they're planners,
Right.
um, most people have an outline. They have an idea of the story and where it's going to go. In
Right.
this, for the first book, um, we had the plot. The plot literally follows the Hans Christian Andersen plot, but it's like, how do I extrapolate that and make it, its own thing?
Right.
Uh, and there are examples. West Side Story is Romeo and Juliet. You
Yeah.
know, Grendel. I loved this book when I was younger. Is a retelling of Beowulf from the monster's point of view.
Right.
And so interestingly enough, there were a couple of other really, really, uh, you can see the DNA when I tell you in that the whimsy of it, because I wanted it to be whimsical. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of wordplay. And I take things like the witch or the tree or dogs from the thing,
Hmm.
turn them into something else. And so to begin that world, I leaned on like Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, and what it would be like, to create that world from the bottom up. Also, strangely enough, Richard Adams' Watership Down. He
Mm.
created an entire belief system for rabbits, an entire mythology, that they believe in and that affected their lives. And so, as that is the jumping off point, I thought, okay, I've got, a planet that's torn into, a little space Superman kind of thing going on there. And a civilization that like the Mayans or the Aztecs or whomever worship their sons, and there are twin sons. So there is this sort of through line of duality of worlds clashing throughout that, and so all of the swears, like I spent some time in Montreal when I was doing a movie called Shadow of the Wolf, Agaguk, all of the swears are French Catholic. They're based on their beliefs in the church. Tabernacle, sacrament.
Yeah.
And so when everything is flaming, or all of this, it's referring to their belief system and their worship of these two suns that have such an effect on both of the planets.
Gotcha. You referenced the push and pull in the writer community of pantsers versus plotters. Being someone who has recently come to the writer community in the last 5 years or so, but have spent so much time creating, writing, in the film world. Was that a concept that is outside of the novel writing world, the planners and pantsers? Is that a thing that exists in screenplays or writing for screen?
Yes, and once again, as you said, it depends on the genre.
Mm,
I don't think you can write a murder mystery by the seat of your pants.
right.
You
True.
have to
Yeah.
know where you're going and how you're going to solve the mystery and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are other things that can go along as they come out of your head. Um, and for me, I started with a screenplay that was based on the graphic novel idea,
Yeah.
and the original Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale, which is like 5 pages long. I mean, you could, and
Yeah.
I urge people, if they're going to read the first book, read Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tale first, because you'll get a kick out of all of the Easter eggs and the references that follow that storyline. So I had a template, so to speak. With the second book, less so, much less so.
Yeah.
But then I like an actor who has learned his lines and shows up on set, and yet there's a bunch of other stuff coming at you, a lot of new information that you have to sort of immediately integrate, because you can't just do the lines like you study them in your living room. Now
Sure.
all of a sudden it's raining, or the other actor's doing something you didn't expect them to do, or the director's giving you a thought that was not even occurred to you. you
Right.
know I took the screenplay, and as I was expanding it for the novel, new things, started occurring to me. Character, traits. A lot of the secondary characters now suddenly got fleshed out. A lot of things that I would have left to the art department or the
Yeah.
wardrobe department or all that. Now I'm having to see the movie in my head and describe it. So there was quite a bit of inspiration that was happening in the moment as the book went along, and even more so in the second one, where I was following a certain through line, and all of a sudden, I mean, there's a couple of real epiphanous moments in the
Yeah.
second book where I went, "Oh my gosh, let's do this," because it makes all the sense in the world, where literally, and I've heard other writers do that, where the story led you there. The
Yeah.
story led you to this thing that you had not planned on.
Well, and it reads that way. If I can be so bold to say that you can, there are parts in the book where there's a turn, and I can imagine you sitting at the keyboard having that epiphanous moment, because that's when a book is great, when you know that this was not just um a calculated um event, but something bigger is happening. If you know, the writing world, we get to talk in these, strange, ethereal, kind of tones, but you can kind of sense that when the story sort of takes on a life of its own.
Yeah, absolutely. And uh, it's a real joy, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, sometimes when I've done a take, or even as a director, and you go, wow, what just happened? Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's great, because it was so in the moment. and,
Yeah.
and I felt the same way about some of this writing, in that suddenly I'm going down a path that I didn't realize we were going to go down, and then it's sort of like a flower blossoms in front of you, and you're just going, okay, okay. And I mean, a lot of times, boom, there I am.
Yeah.
uh it's when during the pandemic, it was fantastic. Not that was anything was great about it.
Right.
I would take a cigar and my yellow pad, and there was a lovely little Italian restaurant when I was living in Battery Park, that would give you a little bit of a cognac in a to-go cup, and I'd sit there looking at the Statue of Liberty, having my cigar with my cognac, and just writing away, and letting the thoughts wander where they will. And that was always it was knowing that I was taking a living thing out for a walk. That
Yeah.
was a
So I'm working on a book for this November, and I was just telling some folks this morning that I have a pretty detailed plan that I'm working from. But the exciting thing for me at this book is finding the places in between the planned points where creativity can just kind of take on a life of its own while staying within that structure. Since the first book especially really follows a plan that's ages old, you kind of knew where you were going, but it sounds like you had these epiphanous moments, to borrow from what you said a minute ago, that where you could be creative within that framework. Was that surprising to you, that you can kind of have a foot in each world, the planner and the pantser? You've got a plan, you know where you're going, yet still magical things can happen.
100%. And it's interesting, because I think a lot of writers, they want to be iconoclastic or monolithic or whatever.
Yeah.
I do believe that my experience as an ensemble actor, who's worked with a lot of other people, or the collaboration that it takes to be a director, to work with your art department, your cinematographer, your cast, your writers, all of that, uh, you know, uh, uh, really played into both books, in the respect that, I mean, first of all, Yvonne, who was the wellspring of all of this, was my sounding board. and
Mm.
and I would write a page, 2 pages, whatever it was, per day, and then I'd read it to her, and she would make suggestions, or and it would also help her envision, her
Right.
illustration. But we talked about Red Bruno, who edited the first book, and then Penelope Burns, my literary agent. Both of them contributed thoughts that were like, "What about this?" Or, "We might need a little bit more of that," just in the respect that and Red, especially in the first one, with his real sort of sci-fi action
Mhm.
sensibility, said, "Could we get a little bit more of this here?" Or and it was always nice, because like directing an actor, you don't want to give them a line reading, but they would give me a nice place to jump off. you know
Yeah.
they were making suggestions, and Penelope had a couple of, I think, really key thoughts in the first one that gave rise to some great character choices, and even plot developments. So it's that process of figuring it all out for yourself. But then I think letting go of a little bit of ego, and allowing people to have that, that input, because they represent the audience, they represent the reader, of that hopefully, you will have done everything you can to make it the best product possible.
And it really is a collaborative process at a point. But
Yeah,
in the beginning, it's very much a solitary process.
yeah.
Um, and I've
Which
gotten to
is,
know
don't disagree with your editor or your agent or whatever, and go, no,
yes,
do that, because that's not the direction I want to go with this. So
right.
sorry to interrupt.
Well, but I was just going to say that I've gotten to know several people in doing podcasts that were involved in film or TV or as either actors or directors or writers that then come over to novel writing. And I've often wondered if, because when you're in this collaborative process where you're working with so many people, there's a certain amount of compromise that has to come because it all can't be your vision, even if you're the leading man. It just cannot all be your vision. There's so many, even as the viewer, we don't think about all of the people involved, but there's so many people involved. But then as the writer, at least in the first draft stage, you get to kind of wear all of those hats.
Yeah.
Is that um, is that an exciting thing for someone that's been involved in such collaborative work for so long to get to sit down and you really are kind of the god of this universe?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And
Yeah.
it's interesting. A lot of people ask me, what I like best, acting on stage or acting in movies, or, TV versus film, or, acting versus directing. And it's like, well, I love it all.
Yeah.
I'm a storyteller, and it goes back to my theater roots, and the fact that, to get a theater degree, you take classes in all of that stuff.
Right.
You know? And I've often told young, actors, directors, people want to get into the business. These are all action verbs. You want to act, do you want to direct? You want to dance? You want to, all of that. You have to do it. You don't just sit around and talk about it.
Right.
You physically have to do it. The one thing that I think is really wonderful about writing is that you don't need anybody else's permission. As an actor, you can do monologues in your living room all day long, but you don't get to do it on stage until somebody hires you. Same
Right.
thing, director. You can dance all you want, but until you're a dance company, you're not a professional. The thing about writing is it starts with you, and who knows where it's going to go, but it literally starts with you sitting down and doing the work. And it's the one place where, like you said, you can be autonomous, at least through the first draft. And it's up
Yeah.
to you. Unless you're working for a magazine or a newspaper or whatever else, it's up to you whether you finish this or do this. My daughter Indigo wants to be a writer illustrator. She has great ideas. She's got a wonderful command of the language. She's a wordsmith. What she doesn't have is the discipline to finish something. And so, like, start something, she'll read it to me, and then like 2 weeks later, I'm going, "Whatever happened to that little short story we're gonna do?" "Oh yeah, I didn't." It's like, "God, you got it." Nobody ever gets published with unfinished work, unless you
Right.
die. You know what I mean?
Right. Um, One thing that people learn when they start writing and publishing, especially, is that the more successful you become, the less time you have to spend in your craft, and I would imagine you have all manner of irons in the fire. How do you carve out time to still be creative, to do the writing, to do the creating of new stories, while juggling all the stuff that you've got going on, and now you've added author to that, and you've got all of the publicity, doing stuff like this right now, answering messages from people, all of the things. How do you stay focused on creating while still managing all of the stuff that comes with it?
uh, Brother, that's the constant struggle. That's the
Right.
war right there. Honestly, if I wasn't talking to you, I might be writing right now.
Yeah.
And I've been so busy, and I've got so much stuff coming up. I'm literally working on a book. And once again, this is that full circle thing. I wrote a book in college. Uh, and then when I got to Hollywood, I think I did a revision. My screenplay agent gave it to a literary agent. That literary agent happened to be Deborah Schneider, who now represents me. And she tried to sell this book, back in the 80s. And
Wow.
in the movie Ambition that I wrote the screenplay for,
Mhm.
my character's a writer. And I'm burning rejection letters in the thing. Those are copies of the rejection letter I got for this novel.
Oh,
Just
wow.
a bit of a catharsis for me.
Yeah.
But I've always thought that the story was really good. And so I went back, I revisited, and I went, yes, this is what I'm going to do. Plus, it actually has it provides another amazing opportunity for Yvonne to illustrate. But I'm always amazed because when you log into your little Word program, it tells you the last time you wrote, and I'm like, oh God, yeah, 2 weeks. You know what I mean? And so I try to grab the time when I can. Um, the revisions and even a lot of the writing for the first book and second book happened when I was doing Prodigal Son. And on a film set, when you're not directing, you're sitting around for hours sometimes between takes.
Right.
And I bring my computer and bring a yellow pad. And I was able to do a lot of the revisions while I was filming. And I found out that multitasking while the creative juices are flowing was actually really good for me. Um, and so now over the holidays, I'm hoping to get back to the book that I'm working on right now. But it's, like I said, it is a struggle. I envy people like Craig and like Chris Bojalian. Those guys are putting out a book a year. And I'm like, wow. But they treat it as their job. They get up at 7 o'clock, they get in front of the computer, they work until 5, whatever. I mean, it's really sort of stunning. I don't believe, and I'll be really honest, I don't believe I'd have that kind of discipline to sit and write for that long. I spend time, looking out the windows or smoking my cigar, or weep or walking the dog while I'm ruminating.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know that like Craig Johnson splits wood and Chris Bojalian goes on bike, so it's not all tethered to the computer.
Yeah. Well, Craig will tell you that he has a cabin that he will go off to as well, where he can't do anything but write. It's you sit around and be bored until, well, I might as well pull the computer out and write. What else am I going to do? So that helps too. Some too. Um, Tagline on the Tinderbox Underground movement. What if Romeo and Juliet had survived and become middle-aged parents? How provocative. Was this that idea that you said Yvonne reached in and pulled an idea out between passages? What was this the original idea, or did that original idea lead to this?
The original idea led to it.
Okay.
Uh, what is interesting is, there's got to be conflict, right? And as I said, the first book, spoiler alert, happy ever after, right? It ends on a really high note. Um, and so we for a long time wondered what the conflict would be. It was Yvonne who came up with the threat of the second book.
Mm,
Uh, what the threat was, where it came from, and what it could ultimately do, and how that was going to scam likely.
oop.
Scam likely. I keep getting these scam likely things.
Oh,
Anyway,
no.
yeah. So she presented me with that idea, and then it was about figuring out, okay, how do I create a plot out of this? And I've said that the first book is a fairy tale. The second one is more of a murder mystery, and also, I mean, the upheaval of, and yes, underground movement is 100% a play on words. It is. It starts out with these quakes, and we call them mano quakes because it's not on Earth. They're not earthquakes. They're on the planet Mono, and it's like
Right.
causing them, where they come from, and then also the upheaval that's happening, and is there an underground movement to topple the peace of the kingdom as we know it? And that cover design is very, very purposefully an echo of the little girl on the Les Miserables poster. Um, and it's Hester, who was introduced in the prologue as a psychic, who was having these visions and knows that a threat is coming. And even those colors,
Yeah.
it is fully meant to have that sort of French Revolution kind of call out.
Right. And that's really the fun thing about science fiction and fantasy to me, is that you can allude to these things that are real world, a part of our history, and you can touch on them. You can kind of get a view 360 degrees around this thing that we're familiar with, but in a way kind of reimagine it all. Is that kind of fun for you of science fiction fantasy, of this kind of fantastical sort of genre, is the ability to um to not be so precious with the facts, and be able to really get a unique look at things.
Well, I mean, yes, and the beauty of, I think, good writers, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but there has to be a point of view. That's
Yeah.
why directors are auteurs. They have a point of view. They have a
Right.
vision of something. And so what it is you're writing, you are certainly, you're not just a reporter. You are injecting your thoughts, your philosophies, your feelings about something into the story. As there's a great, there's a big environmental aspect, to the second book, an ecology, if you will, and certainly, political, overtones, palace intrigue, all of that, uh,
Yeah.
um, and I've often said, it started with the American Western, that
Mhm.
those were our fables, those were our fairy tales,
Right.
um, and then the science fiction has literally sort of become, a Western with hardware,
Yeah.
and yeah, you look at it in that context, and then you go back to even Aristotle, who set so much of his writing, Shakespeare set so much of their writing against the backdrop of war. And why is that? It is because in these life and death scenarios, in the context of the world could change, that everyone's lives rest on these events, then you can really underline and shine a light on those parts of human character that matter to us: courage, bravery, integrity, discipline, loyalty. All of these things, become heightened and become the stuff of fairy tales, if you will. But you can
Yeah.
set them, in this arena. And the wonderful thing about sci-fi too, and about fantasy, for instance, is that it's not mundane. You're not hitting
Right.
people head with something that is dry and clinical. It becomes part of the fabric of the story, which I think is somewhat more palatable.
Yeah. Um, we mentioned earlier that Underground Movement is a bit of a murder mystery, and we got this great comment from NJ West. To write a murder mystery, you must first commit the crime, then chase yourself, evade yourself, then catch yourself, and make all of it interesting and entertaining. Hard thing to do. Yeah, I love that comment. That's absolutely right. You've got to be you have to be both sides there. How did you start thinking about the mystery that really was going to be at the heart of this story?
Yeah. I mean, when the book actually comes out, people start reading. I'm literally, I'm going to go on X and go, guys, no spoilers, know,
Right.
because it does hinge on some cataclysmic stuff.
Yeah.
The inciting event, which happens early on in the book, you know, came to me early, because it's like, but much like the first book starts with this battle, and with stranding Everson, our hero, our soldier of Indira. I felt like there needed to be something that just grabbed the reader and made them go, what? And go from there, you
Yeah.
know. And so it was that, and then it was setting up enough plausible perpetrators, red herrings, all of
Right.
that. And going back, and this was one of the times when I went back and went, is this too much? Am I leaning too heavily on this character? Am I saying enough about this character where there's gray area? Am I revealing, too much about this character that's going to spoil, whatever surprise there is for the reader? So that was the going back and forth and trying to create scenarios where like a good Agatha Christie. Who is it on the train? Who is it? Which one of the 10 little Indians on the island is it? It's all of those things. Or is it something that is totally unexpected?
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned a few minutes ago the book that you're working on now.
Yeah.
So are we gonna see another book set in this world, or what are you thinking?
What I'm working on right now is not of this
Okay.
book. It is not. Um, I mean, speaking of which, I mean, we were talking about, a writer's, perspective. I wrote it, when I was a young man, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of my philosophy in it. It's interesting because I was heavily influenced in reading when I was a teenager by Richard Bach, Jonathan
Sure.
Livingston Seagull, Illusions, the Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah, One, The Bridge Across Forever. I read them all, loved them all. And it's funny because I did the voice, the audiobook of the Celestine Prophecies, and the entire time I'm going, this is just rehashed Richard Bach, you know. But it was I mean, but once again, it was my homage at that. The funny
Yeah.
thing is, I've gone back to, and once again, the plot's going to be there. Although I'm literally working on a brand new section that wasn't a part of the first book because I got, inspired by other things. One of the things that I did realize, and I've laughed about it with my wife a lot, is that going back and rereading this, I thought, wow, I was a little bit of a pretentious young man. you know, I just really thought I had something to say,
Yeah.
and I was heavy-handed about it,
Yeah.
and I've learned, you know, obviously, thank goodness, hopefully, have a lot more wisdom than I had when I was in my early 20s, but also much more of a sense of humor, and the whimsy was always there, and the wordplay was always there, and there was a fun to the characters, but I'm getting away from the pedantic in
Yeah.
this, and I think making it more readable, to be quite honest. And I've learned a few things about writing since then, So it's a real joy to find that sentence or that paragraph, or even sometimes a whole page where I'm going, okay, that's good. There are other times where we're going, dude, what were you thinking? You know? And so that's been a joy. It's totally different. It's set in nature. I can't even tell you the title because that'll tell you everything about the book. But it's fun, and Craig Johnson will be proud of me. And I've already told him it's written in first person. So
Ah,
yeah,
nice.
it's a change. It's a little bit of a change of pace for me.
Nice. Um, Before we let you go, Lou, because as I mentioned, we are in the middle of National Novel Writing Month, and we're in the middle of this writing challenge that we're doing. Do you have any advice or anything that you would tell someone now that you're a wizened writer with two published books under your belt, another one forthcoming, and decades of experience in the creative arts? If someone is sitting down at their keyboard and they're trying for the first time to get this story that we all have inside of us out, what is a piece of advice that you would leave with them?
Um, be honest with yourself. You have to find your voice. Um, and it's been said before. I'm not the first person to say it, but if you want to be a great writer, you need to be a great reader. So read everything. Read new books that are coming out. Go back and revisit the classics. I just finished Animal Farm again after 40 years. Because I was like, I need to. My daughter had just read it. Said I need to take a look at that again myself.
Yeah.
you know, and so figure out what you like as in writing and in reading, and then how do you find that within yourself, and what is your voice, and to be personal with that, uh, um, and then just put in the work, man. What does it say? It's 10% inspiration, 90% perspiration.
Right.
So it is, and I don't know how many times throughout my acting or directing career or whatever, I hear people, hey, I always wanted to be an actor. It's like, no, you didn't. If you did, you would have done it. You know what I mean?
Mm.
It's that's easy to say, but it's another thing to put in the work. So be honest with yourself, not only in your voice and what you have to say and how you're going to say it, but be honest with yourself and know that, do I have this in me to undertake this mission? You know?
Excellent advice. Uh, the Tinderbox Underground Movement comes out everywhere November 19th. We're going to put links we've already put a link in the show notes where you can go grab the book or go visit your local bookstore or audiobook format from audible.com. I've read the book. It's amazing. You're going to love it. Lou Diamond Phillips, always a pleasure to get to catch up. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Hank.